So we are going to be looking at selecting and transforming. So this is just a very quick scene that I've created just with some boxes, just to discuss a few things before we get into the actual activity. So at this point you can just watch, you don't need to follow along. So here I've got a few rows and columns of boxes. So let's talk about selecting first. So the easiest way to select is literally just to click on things. So you need to be on your selection tool, which is this one up here, select object. The keyboard shortcut is Q. And if I just click on something, I select it. If I click on something else, that gets selected. If I hold down Control and select something else, it adds to my selection. If I hold down Alt and click on a selected item, it gets subtracted from the selection. Okay, so Control to add to the selection, Alt to subtract from the selection. If I want to select from my Scene Explorer, here I've got all of the boxes and items listed. I simply select and then hold down Control and select other items. To subtract from my selection, Alt, click on the items. Oh, sorry, in the Scene Explorer it's actually Control to remove the items. So that's a little bit different. Alright, when you're selecting also you have different shapes that you can choose for selecting. So besides just clicking on something, the default is this rectangular selection region, which means let's go to full view for top view. So that's option W or Alt W. If I drag, I can select whatever is within or touching that selection rectangle. Okay, if I change to any of these other options like circular and I drag, whatever is touching that circle will be selected. You have a freeform one where you can actually draw a selection to touch specific items, and you have a, what do they call it, paint selection region, which means I literally just drag over to select. A lot of these selection options are very useful when you are modeling in sub-object mode, but at the moment we're not dealing with that. This is a very beginner level. The default is the rectangular selection, so that's the normal one. If you are selecting and you drag and touch something, it will be selected if this option here, window crossing, is off. If it's on, and I just touch an object with my selection rectangle, it doesn't select it. I have to envelope or encompass the whole object in order for it to be selected. So that's if window crossing is on. So sometimes it's useful for it to be on and sometimes it's useful for it to be off. It just depends on the situation. And it might be easier to select something if it's on, but by default it's off. Okay, so that's a little bit about selecting. Let's look at transforming. So transforming refers basically to these three options here: move, rotate, and scale. And if you look at your keyboard, Q is to select an object, and if you go to the right of your Q key, you've got W, E, R. So W is for move, E is for rotate, and R is for scale. Okay, so it's an easy set of keys to remember. So W to move. So I'm just going to go into full screen mode for perspective view, and I'll just select this object here and zoom into it. So if I'm on select and move, it means that I can move an object in an individual axis. I'm just undoing as I do it. So as I move over an axis and it becomes highlighted in yellow, that means I'm constrained to that axis. If I go to the middle, you can see that I can choose to constrain it to two axes, so X and Y, and Z and Y, and so on. So when you are moving, and if I go to the right to the corner and I drag, I'm not constrained by any axis. When you are moving things, it's a good idea to stick to at least one or two axes and not try and move things in, or even rotate or scale them in all three axes at the same time. Maybe scale, but move and rotate, it's quite difficult, and even experienced 3D operators generally try and work in one or two axes at a time. It just means more precision. If you press E for rotate, you'll see that you get these little loops which suggest how you're rotating something. Now this can be a little bit tricky. In recent versions of 3ds Max, they've made it a lot, as far as I'm concerned, a lot less usable, because you'll see what I mean. If I go onto this Z axis and I drag, can you see the way it actually is moving it in all three axes? Now you hardly ever do that when you're rotating stuff with precision. Most of the time you want to move in just one axis at a time. So what you've got to actually do is just get the sweet spot where it's going to constrain it to just one axis. So I'm just going to rotate it around, and I'm going to go back there. Nope, let me try the Z. Okay, so you can see now it is definitely constrained to the X axis, and I can't rotate it in any other axis. Let's try on the Y. Yep, that's working, and then back to the Z. There we go. Okay, so it's just one of those things that I really just have an issue with. It feels like a bug to me, but it seems like it's by design. But it is what it is. Scaling R, you can see that I can scale the whole thing from the middle. I can scale on just two axes at a time, or I can scale on just one axis at a time. If you want to be precise, you have these options down at the bottom here to move, rotate, or scale specifically and numerically. So for example, if I go to rotate and I wanted to rotate this by 10 degrees, so I can say on the x-axis 10, enter, and it's now rotated exactly 10 degrees. You'll see that on the side here I have an option to switch from absolute to world. Okay, it doesn't actually say that here, but if I put offset mode transform type in, if I put this option on, then you'll see that this is kind of a world value. In other words, if I type in 10, it goes another 10. If I turn it off, you'll see it's gone 20 degrees. So this is absolute, which means that it's telling you the absolute rotation of the object. This is by how many degrees do I want to rotate it from where it is now. So what I normally do, let me just undo that, is I normally go up to the tool, so here the rotate tool, and I right click on it to bring up my transform type in, where I can choose from absolute or world, or offset to, sorry, absolute or offset. So here if I say 20 degrees on the x-axis, that's cool. If I go to offset 20 degrees, it goes to 40, and this one zeroes itself back out again. Okay, so absolute is the actual value of the object in terms of its rotation, position, and scale. Offset is by how much you want to change it specifically, but it will always zero itself out. So forget that I said world earlier on. It's actually world for both, but it's offset and absolute. Okay, so excuse me, with that little bit of information, we're going to do a little exercise here, and you can follow along for practice. So if you go to the description in the video, you'll find a link to my G drive, and you will be able to find this file. So I'm just going to find it. Where is it? Here. And I've provided you with two versions. That's a 2023 3ds Max version and a 2020 if you're on an older version of 3ds Max. So I'm going to open the 2021. So what you can see we've got here is a dustbin, and we've got 8 objects, 4 boxes and 4 balls. We're going to put them in the dustbin, and we're going to make it look like the dustbin is full of objects. So the first thing we want to do is open the dustbin lid. So if you have a look in your Scene Explorer, you've got a trash bin and you've got a trash bin lid. So if I take the trash bin lid here, I'm going to maximize my left view, and I press E for rotate. You can see that the pivot point for this object is at the bottom, which means if I rotate it, that's not what I want. Now, what I need to do is I need to put the pivot point at the exact place where it's going to rotate. So I'm going to go to my hierarchy tab on the side here, and I'm going to say Effect Pivot Only, and I'm going to say W to move, select and move, and I'm going to move that pivot point up. Just zoom in a bit and position it exactly where it's going to rotate from. Once you've finished, turn Effect Pivot Only off. So now, if I press E to rotate, you can see I'm rotating it exactly where I want it to rotate. So I'm going to rotate that up a bit, and then Alt W to go out of there. And then what I want to do is I want to just grab these, scale them, rotate them, and position them so that they're in the dustbin. Now remember, with 3D, you only model what the camera will see. So we don't need to fill up the whole dustbin. We just need to fill up the top area, because that's the only area we're going to see. So this is just practice moving, rotating, and positioning. Now if I take this box, I'm going to switch to the top view. And I'm doing this very laboriously because it's good practice to get into the habit of doing things this way. So I'm just going to position it in the middle of the dustbin, and then I'm going to go to my front view, and I'm going to move that up. Okay, so now in my perspective view, I know that that's in the right position. I'm now going to press E and just rotate it around a bit, and W, and let's just position that like that. Okay, now I want to put another box on the side here, so I'm going to take this one, and once again in my top view, position it. In my front view, move it up. In my perspective view, I'm going to move it to the side here. Now when you rotate something, so if I E to rotate, and I'm going to rotate it around a bit, if I now want to move it, can you see that the coordinate reference system is based on the view? I want it to be based on the angle of the object. So up here I'm going to change view to local. And now you can see that the gizmo has adopted the rotation of the actual object. I'm going to press R to scale. I'm going to scale the whole thing down a bit. And then E to rotate. Let's rotate it a bit. W to move. And let's just position it so that it's somewhere like that. Okay, and so I'm going to speed this up because it's basically going to be the same process of positioning, rotating, scaling to fill the top, and you can do it in a completely different arrangement, but the point here is to practice transforming objects, scaling, moving, rotating, so that you get a feel for how that works in 3ds Max. So I'm going to speed this up. Okay, so that's a fairly rushed job, but it gives the kind of impression that I wanted you to achieve, which is basically a trash can full of containers. So one other thing I wanted to mention is that when you're selecting an object, like let's say that, if you want to lock your selection so you can't accidentally select something else, there's a little lock down here, the shortcut is spacebar, and then you can see lock selection, or you can just click on it, and the other shortcut is Shift Control N. Okay, so spacebar and then lock selection. Okay, now one of the things that I have experienced in the past is people who use Adobe products have got used to the spacebar, meaning to pan around like in Photoshop or Illustrator. So when you're using 3ds Max, it's quite easy to accidentally use the spacebar to think that you're going to pan around, and then you accidentally lock your selection. So just remember to check that. You might have done that by mistake. Alright, so that's a little bit of practice with selecting, moving and rotating and scaling. I hope you've enjoyed this video. Please subscribe to my YouTube channel and see you next time.